Well, after a moment of hilarity with Terry Wogan and Bruce there, I'm afraid the news is very bad from Brussels. Hooliganism has struck again, and I'm afraid the scenes are as bad as anything we've seen for a long, long time. People have been stretchered off. The Liverpool supporters took on the police at one point. It's not certain whether any lives have been lost at this moment. Joe Fagan, with obviously tremendous sympathy with what was going on in his last match for Liverpool, went on the pitch and appealed to the crowd, saying, you know, this is my last match, please behave yourselves. And it looks there as if they're getting some control of the scenes afterwards. I understood that a wall collapsed at one point, which was the origination of some of the trouble, and certainly the thing that may have caused those injuries. I'm not suggesting those injuries were caused or inflicted by crowds of either side. But you can see the police there. Such typical pictures, we're extremely used to them over here. And Peter Jones, the BBC football correspondent, said probably some of the worst scenes that he has seen at a football ground, which speaks for itself. But it does seem, with the kick-off in not all that many minutes' time now, if it should take place, as if they are restoring some kind of order. Well, what an unhappy start. Graham Souness and Terry Venables in Italy and Spain, respectively, being a little bit away from our hooliganism problem, but probably sad to see it still there, Terry.
Well, it's quite sickening. I mean, at a time when, certainly in Spain, I don't know about Italy, they have a tremendous respect now for British football. We are getting really to the front at last, after a long period of being out off the scene. But when you mention this side of our game, the hooliganism, it's quite sickening to feel that people feel so bad about us all around Europe at a time when our football was becoming uppermost in our history for about 10, well, at least for 10, 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I'm afraid these events have rather overtaken what we were going to do. I was going to congratulate you first, Graham, on last night's result for Scotland and ask you what you thought about the Joe Fagan business, but I'm afraid because of what's happened, we shall go straight now to Brussels and join John Motson.
Well, for the last 50 minutes, the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, the capital of Belgium, has been a sickening and bewildering sight. As a result, there is for certain serious injury when a wall collapsed, and maybe worse. I've seen at least 2 stretchers carried away, and the stretchers were covered from head to foot. To give you the evidence of my own eyes, the situation as I saw it, at the left end of the stadium were supporters of both Liverpool and Juventus. They were divided by 2 long poles in various sections, poles over which it was quite easy to climb, under which it was quite easy to move. And after a while, supporters of Liverpool moved into the Juventus area. For a while, there were some scuffles between the rival supporters, a great deal of the sort of threatening, animal, hate-like behavior which we've become all too accustomed to seeing at home. And then a lot of the Juventus supporters decided the time had come to move away, and they moved away with such pace and in such numbers. And in moving down towards the track that surrounds this ground here at the Heysel Stadium, a wall collapsed, and certainly there were people pinned underneath the wall. I should say it is quite a small wall of no more than about 4 feet in height, and there were a number of barriers in front of the wall and around the wall. So one can only hope that the injuries are not as serious as are being reported. There is no question there will be quite a delay before the start of the match. That's the wall I was talking about, which collapsed at the bottom of the terracing. The Juventus supporters came onto the running track and onto the pitch. We saw the riot police appear. We saw the mounted police. We saw scenes all too familiar. And I think those of us in this commentary box felt once again an embarrassment at being British. Because just to our right is the box of Rai, the Italian television company, who, like us, had come here to cover a football match between 2 of the great sides of Europe. And instead, their commentator was surrounded by tearful, hugely animated supporters of Juventus complaining to him about what had happened and trying to explain to him what we were all wanting to know. How can such things go on? There are the mass ranks of Liverpool supporters who have stayed in their own area. There are still others who, it has to be said, are standing in the area provided for Juventus. We can, of course, argue that the divide between the two should have been properly policed. Indeed, one might go further and say that the supporters of one team should have been at one ground and of the other team at the other. But I have to say that up to the point of the problems, the scene here reminded me very much of Rome in 1977. A sunny, balmy evening, just a slight breeze, everybody anticipating what we thought was going to be a great game. But how things have changed in those 8 years, because then the supporters of Liverpool were full of humour and played such a great part in the success of their side. This evening, I'm afraid, some of those supporters have disgraced the name of a great club. And that once again, the minority have dragged the majority down to be despised around the football grounds of Europe. That's the Juventus end. Their end has been quiet, except for the waving of flags and the usual chants and firecrackers. What we've seen at the other end has saddened the eye and really made us feel quite wretched. It's happening all too often. Sitting alongside me, Bobby Charlton, who saw not dissimilar scenes, Bobby, in Turin when England played there in the European Championship. You said then that you felt embarrassed, or maybe that wasn't the word you used, to be British. I wonder how you feel now.
Well, Barry, I think they've explained it as well as anyone possibly could. Sitting up here at the back of the stand in comparative safety, I still felt very, very frightened indeed, as anyone would be, to see such scenes. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that some people have been killed. It would appear that way. Immediately it became known, I think, even to the Liverpool supporters, that it was really serious. They started to calm down. They also had Joe Fagan, who came out and tried to calm them down, to tell them to go back to their original positions in the ground, and they've basically done that up to a point. But there again, I think, and I'm not trying to defend what happened, but certainly the section area which was supposed to divide the Juventus and the Liverpool fans was really flimsy. It was so flimsy it was ridiculous. But nevertheless, I think that maybe, and it's a horrible thing to say, but maybe it has needed something like this to maybe make people take notice and actually do something to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I think that it's a disgrace the way people behave when they come into a football match. It is supposed to be a recreation. They're supposed to enjoy it. And I don't think for a moment it should be anything other than a sporting occasion. How do you explain it? I really don't know. I mean, you don't know the type of mentality that would perform such acts. Nevertheless, it seems to be a little quieter now than it has been, certainly over this last hour. And for all the people that have been injured or have been fatally injured, I'm afraid, it has been a disastrous night, certainly from a humanitarian point of view. I hope that the game eventually does get going, but it certainly has a shadow over it.
I have to tell you that we have a report from the Brussels police which suggests that the death toll at the moment may be 15. The police are now making efforts to clear the pitch, and Bobby's reaction, I can tell you, as some of the fans still seem to want to be embroiled in fighting, I can tell you he's had to try and find the answer to many spectators who've come up to him in his seat in the stand alongside me to ask one of the great names of British football how he can explain it. And it is impossible to do so. I think these scenes that we're looking at, in fact, are a recording of the earlier problems. But as one does look at them, one cannot but feel the time has come, indeed, if I can express a personal opinion, has long since passed, when we have to consider the majority. And if that means that we have to take some steps to prevent the minority coming abroad to drag the name of our country into the gutter, then we have to do it. Because it seems that nothing less than that will solve this problem. At least let us try and sort out the problem at home and not have to explain it to those abroad. We're looking there at Rick de Sadler, the commentator of BRT, the company who are producing the pictures for tonight's transmission. He is trying to explain it. People have come up and said to us, it's not normal. And it shouldn't be, but sadly it is becoming all too normal for our national game. Juventus supporters standing calmly, for the most part, waving flags. There were one or two involved in the scuffles and scuffles. One doesn't want to apportion blame. One can only say that it has happened too often involving British supporters to be thought to be coincidence. The pitch, at long last, is actually clear. The photographers who came to capture the goalmouth incidents have had to point their cameras to the crowds, as indeed have the television cameras. It's a lovely evening, absolutely ideal for a game of football. A meeting between two sides who have been so much at the top of the tree of European football. Liverpool trying to win the European Cup for the 5th time. Juventus having never previously won it, but with a chance this evening, if the match can take place, of becoming the first side ever to win all 3 European competitions. And what a sad occasion to mark the retirement of Joe Fagan, the manager of Liverpool for the last 2 seasons, who confirmed this afternoon that because he felt that he was perhaps a little old for the job at 64, and because he felt tired, that now had come the moment to hand over to a younger man. And we are told just on that point not to think in terms of a successor, but of successors, with Kenny Dalglish very much the strong favourite to take over the role, with, one feels, a helping hand from somebody of experience in management. But very sad scenes, bewildering scenes, all too familiar scenes at the final of the European Cup. The 30th holding of this final has been marred before it starts. And from the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, let's go back to the quiet and Jimmy Hill in the studio.
Well, thank you, Barry. And if we can almost try and get our minds back to the game of football and Liverpool Football Club at the moment, may I ask, Graham, was it a surprise to you that Joe Fagan made that decision today?
Yes, I thought he was going to give it another year. I thought at the end of next year he would have called it a day. And I've said in the book I've just written that I thought Kenny Dalglish would have a chance to get in the job. This year, I don't know, I think it might be a wee bit early for Kenny. Maybe Barry's right in saying that someone else, along with Kenny, will be doing it. But I think it's a bit early for Kenny to be doing it himself.
You know you're about not quite the same position as Kenny, but almost. And would you think it's possible to take over a club of that size coming straight off the field?
No, I don't think so, no. I think you'd need someone alongside of him. But of course, there's Ronnie Moran and Roy Evans there who have been there a lot of years, and maybe one of those could help him. But I think they may bring someone in from the outside.
Maybe Bob Paisley could return even for a year or so.
Possibly. I think Joe has definitely had enough. If he said that's it. And I know the old boss misses it very much, but whether he could be persuaded to come back into it, I don't know. He certainly, they couldn't get anyone better than him to help Kenny on his way, could they?
Mm. Terry, you've been mentioned with most of the clubs in Europe. They haven't linked you yet with Liverpool?
No, they haven't, Jim. No,
no possibilities there, of course?
No.
What do you think about a player like Kenny coming off the field and doing a job like that as a manager?
I think personally it's too difficult at the very top end of the game. I think that if you're going to make mistakes, I think you should make them a little lower down where it's not going to be so expensive. And I think you've got to learn your trade in anything you do in life, and I think football management is no exception.
Mm. Well, let's turn to tonight's game, which was so sad because it was quite sparkling here. We were all looking forward to it very much indeed. Differences of opinion. You were leaning towards Juventus, were you not?
Yes, I was. I've just felt that it's, as I said Saturday, it's the individualism of Juventus against the great, which I feel, great teamwork of Liverpool. The only thing is that I think the teamwork of Liverpool is so advanced and so modern, and playing against a sweeper system for a year now, I think that it certainly has weaknesses, and I think if anybody's going to find those weaknesses, it's going to be Liverpool. At the same time, we have 3 or 4 world-class players, individual players, and it depends whether those individual players function on the night or not. I just hope that whoever wins, it's going to be football, because I've seen a couple of, which I feel, to be fair, disappointing games recently, and I want to watch a game, and afterwards I want to remember some lovely dribbles or some good passes or some good shooting. I want to remember something lovely about the game. And with the people that's involved tonight, we're full of that expectancy, and we obviously, I think everybody hopes tonight that we're going to see that.
Well, we shall keep keeping everybody up to date, of course, when there is a possibility of a kick-off. But the case for Liverpool, Graham, which is your side?
Yes, I think Liverpool will win because they'll have so much of the ball tonight. I think Juventus, with their sweeper system, I'll sit back and try and catch Liverpool on the break, as they did in the Super Cup. And remember, the Super Cup was played in Turin. I think you'll see Liverpool with a lot of the ball tonight, because as Terry said, they're second to no one when it comes to teamwork. You know, they're passing, it looks a good surface, and I just feel that Liverpool have that much of the ball tonight that sooner or later they're going to get a goal. My only fear is that a great deal's made of Platini about the goals he scores, but if you look at the goals he's created and the passes he's made in the previous rounds of the European Cup, he really has got Juventus into the final of the European Cup. And I would have been a lot happier if Briaschi for Juventus hadn't been playing. I think he's an excellent player, and he'll play down the left-hand side, which is up against Phil Neal. And Phil Neal, maybe not as quick as...
Well, I must interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there is some news from Brussels at the moment, and I understand that the match may not even take place. Barry Davis.
Well, still the struggle here at the Heysel Stadium continues to get the situation in order so that we can watch a game of football. That's the terrace at the left end, which an hour or more ago was occupied by supporters of Juventus, with the main Liverpool body to the right. Down in front now of the main stand and the home straight of stadium, famous of course also for athletics as well as for football. They hold the Ivo van Dam Memorial meeting here. And talking of meetings at this precise moment, UEFA, who are responsible of course for all the European competitions, are meeting to decide what to do. We hear that paratroopers from the Belgian army have been sent for. The figure of those who are feared to have died is still at 15, and it appears that the idea of bringing in members of the army is because obviously the spectators at the Juventus end are not aware, indeed, that there have been any fatalities, and obviously we don't know either whether the fatalities are from those who've travelled out from England or those who've made their way from Italy, or indeed those who gained tickets in this capital. Officially there were 14,500 tickets for each club, and the crowd limited to 52,000 here in the stadium. But the majority, and let us stress this point, the majority of Liverpool supporters standing quite calmly, coming to support their team on its way to winning the European Cup for the 5th time. But they, like we, wait to see the outcome, hear the outcome rather, of the UEFA meeting. So back to you, Jim.
Well, we don't know quite what the answer is going to be from Brussels, but meantime, let's have news from John Humphreys.
Well, the latest from the police in Brussels is that at least 15 people have been killed there, and at least 100 people have been injured, some of them seriously. And as you'll have been seeing, the trouble is still going on. It appears to have begun an hour before kick-off, when Liverpool fans broke out of their segregated area of the stadium and moved into the area occupied by Juventus fans. Scuffles and fighting began, and it's reported the Juventus fans did try to move away. but a wall collapsed and caused some of the injuries. At one stage, about 6,000 people were on the pitch. And I've just been given another piece of copy from the Reuters news agency, which says at least 28 fans have been killed altogether so far. So clearly it's the worst incident of its kind that's been seen in European football. Now, back to Jimmy Hill.
Thank you, John. Well, the question I'm going to put to Graham and Terry is, do you think the match should take place in the circumstances? Graham?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a very sad day for football. I feel for the parents who'll be maybe watching this programme, wondering if it's any of their kids who are involved in it. I think maybe we've seen the last English team playing a European competition for a long, long time, Jim.
Those consequences could be very serious, I mean, for football. For English football, Terry. Can you see your way for? I understand they're meeting at the moment, that's what we've heard, yes, to decide about the match, but there's no question that other meetings will take place once this is over, maybe deciding whether they'll have any British teams in Europe ever again, would you say?
I fear the worst now. I think that is over the top. I think that we've let it go and something should have been done a lot earlier. And that's very, very simple to say now, but nevertheless it should have done. We've all criticised and we've all... I suppose really the main problem is that no one's really come up with the answer. And I think the answer is, personally, is that the fear subject.
There are the pictures now. You see, it's still going on. I mean, it just doesn't abate. Throwing stones, just the same kind of appalling action that we saw. You remember Luton and Millwall? You wouldn't have seen that.
No, I haven't seen that, no.
Yeah, the police seeming powerless to stop it, and as if they have some kind of... they want to inflict punishment on
it doesn't happen anywhere else in Europe. OK, it happens elsewhere in Europe, but not on a regular basis, not to the same extent as we have it here.
Do you think that's because the police are more severe? Terry, in Spain, you were saying that.
They're just frightened out of their life. They just can't do it. And if there was just one incident, it's nipped in the bud, you see, but we've not nipped it in the bud, and it's got bigger, until, as what we're talking about, it's got completely out of control. And now it is a hell of a problem to solve it.
Yeah.
But it's the fear factor is the thing. Anywhere in Europe, they're frightened out of the life of the police. And the police hands seem to be tied here.
Yeah. Are the police as severe in Italy?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same situation. If they do it, I mean, there's the Juventus players on the track. They just nip it in the bud. I mean, if someone steps out of line, they get punished right away.
Yeah. And they're too frightened to do it again.
It looks
that's Cabrini.
Yeah, that's Cabrini, and it looks as if the Juventus players are appealing to the fans to just calm down and enable them to get the match played, because one wonders what would happen now if the match was put off, because then you have another problem. The people having travelled all that way.
I think the fact that they've sent for paratroopers suggests that they're, I mean, to me anyway, maybe they're not going to play it. I mean, maybe they're going to try and keep one set of supporters in the ground, let the other go home. But you're going to have the same problem in the city tonight, when they play it or if they don't play it. After the game, both sets of supporters are going to be in the city after the game.
So it is virtually an impossible situation, really, for anybody to decide what is the right course of action. In fact, whatever is done is going to appear to be wrong.
That's right.
The Red Cross at the stadium say that 30 killed and 100 are seriously injured in hospital. With so much trouble, it doesn't seem feasible, really, for players to come out and play a game in that atmosphere.
It's a game of football.
I mean, Graham's just saying about parents worrying if their sons are okay. It's almost like you're talking about them going off to war.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's come to them when our teams go to Europe now. But once again, it's a minority, and so many innocent people get caught up in it.
I think Barry Davis played it very well. It's a severe embarrassment for everyone, and now it's gone beyond that. It's a tragic. Now it's tragic. Now it's tragic.
Would you recommend, I mean, I know it would mean a change of law, and so many of these things do depend on the way the government reacts to it, the taking away of passports in circumstances like this of people who have been proved to be guilty?
I'd like to do more than that, Jim. I think I just feel absolutely...
But that step hasn't even been taken. I mean, those that came back from Finland, was it, were suspended from 5 years for going to Finland, which is not very much of a punishment, is it, in those circumstances? Although 100 were put in jail over there, that was the last time out. Do you think the passport thing could be a deterrent?
But you're talking about, now we're talking about people being killed tonight. Now we've got to say beforehand that if people are going to get caught for doing that, and we've got video cameras, we can catch them, the mother can't say my Jimmy wouldn't do it, because we can say, look, your Jimmy just beaten hell out of little Johnny there, and it's on the, and he's got to go away for 10 years or whatever. That's going to stop them. They won't do it again, and it's fear is the key. You've got to frighten them, because now we're talking about passports if it was nipping it in the bud. We're now talking about a severe major problem, and it is quite sickening, obviously, to everybody that's watching these pictures here this evening.
Well, I always felt that they continue to do it because they get away with it unpunished, and the Cambridge justice seemed to be the first time really that they were really dealt with in a severe way.
Then again, people were shocked by that.
The fact that they were punished so severely.
But there's no fear in anything hardly, is there? They're not frightened of the policemen anymore. And I feel sorry for the policemen in some respects. They don't get a chance to sort it out, and it's got to be sorted out.
I mean, the police catch them. They're doing their job, and then they go to court, and then you get these magistrates giving them £25 fines.
So you would like to see the sort of punishment
severe as it can possibly be. It can't be severe enough, because that now is past anything else I've ever seen. And I haven't got the words to explain how I feel tonight. And I'm sure everybody feels the same.
We came here to talk about a game of football.
Yeah, we kept talking about lovely things about the game, and all of a sudden we're faced with this terrible thing.
It's taking some people's lives away from them and destroying the livelihood of others, because it's your profession, in a way, and it's the profession of a lot of people in this country.
People say, well, it's easy for Terry and I to talk about English teams or British teams being banned from Europe because we're no longer involved with British teams, but I see that as the only answer. I mean, and the way the game is in England today, the team just can't afford to do without European football because there's so much money involved. But I think that's what it's going to come to me. I can't see another way out of it.
In fact, through being out of England, you probably see it in some ways more clearly. You get it in perspective.
Terry's in Spain, I'm in Italy. I mean, there's no one. They're fanatics the same as our supporters are. I mean, in a different way. They're more inclined to outshout each other or have a bigger flag than other supporters. They don't want to be tearing each other's heads off like our supporters seem to want to do.
They have announced, that is the announcement saying that the game will commence, but we're not sure at what time it will commence. I think what they're going to do is to get absolute control of the crowd and then attempt to play the match. But it is an awful task to try and turn your mind back to a game of football. I find it so, sitting here.
Well, it's just we're all shocked, and we might be saying the right things or the wrong things. There's people out there who have got to make fast decisions who are not really perhaps ready for, even though you should always when there's a British team involved. And yet, as you said earlier, whatever decision they make now, it's going to be wrong, because Graham says they're going to worry about what's going to happen in the city. In a beautiful place like Brussels, they're going to be terrified.
See, you wonder what the response will be when the supporters, and sooner or later, before the game finishes, they'll find out that people have died. Now you wonder what's going to happen then. I mean, they can go one of two ways. They can even become more hostile and more violent, or they take the correct way out and behave like human beings. I mean, that's open for argument again.
Quite a few people suggest that it's sometimes the fault of players on the field, but of course this match hasn't started. But it does put an enormous amount of pressure on those players if the game does start. They've got to compete. They weren't going out there in gentle fashion to win this match, either of them, and neither should they really at this stage of the competition. That's so right. They're under extra pressure now, Terry.
Yes, they are. It'd be interesting to know what would you say, Graham, that Joe Fagan, knowing the sort of bloke he was, what would he be saying now to the team?
Well, I think they'll try and keep the fact that people have died away from them, because I know their lives, and that would worry them. I'm not saying that because they're friends of mine, but I know it would worry them. I'm sure it would worry the Juventus players as well, so they'll be trying to keep that away from them. the dressing room, they'll be laughing and joking in there. It's just taking so much away from the game.
I'm sure if we find it difficult to talk about it over those pictures because of shame and sadness and all kind of other emotions, a player would find it extremely difficult to produce his best under those conditions.
He certainly would feel that before the game starts. I think once the game starts, I think that you'd get into the game and they'd be worried again about it afterwards. But I think once the game goes, you'll see a game very close to what we would have seen normally. But
yeah.
Also bearing in mind that Graham said that they might keep this information away from the teams anyway.
Yeah. It doesn't seem, and I think we should make this clear, that the injuries and deaths were a result of direct fighting, but of the wall collapsing.
Well, we don't know, do we?
No, we don't know, but it does seem that. But of course it is the aggression that brings about a situation where a wall does collapse.
That's right.
Well, let's go back to Brussels and get an up-to-date report now from Barry Davis.
Well, Jimmy, we're seeing pictures of the start of the whole problem. These are recorded pictures as some Liverpool supporters moved into the Juventus area. You can see the Juventus supporters trying to get over the wall to our right. Some of them are moving away at the top of the picture and down towards the running track. And it was the pressure of movement down towards the running track which resulted in the wall giving way and people being pinned underneath it. Just look at one or two of these faces. They're faces of fear, frightened people who just don't understand what has happened. And really, there's such an overwhelming feeling here, sitting in the stand, watching these pictures from earlier, looking at the stadium now, a feeling of total helplessness, a feeling of sympathy for those who've been killed and injured, a sympathy for people who love to watch their sport, a sympathy for the game of football, which was one of those things to unite people, which is now in an extraordinary way become amongst a minority, some sort of substitute for war. That people go to watch football matches to defend their ground, to stand up for their team. I mean, I heard Jimmy refer earlier to the Luton Millwall situation. That was all the results of territory being defended and of what had happened at another London ground a few weeks earlier. It had nothing to do with the cup tie itself, I don't believe, at Luton. And this is just a scene of total mayhem that resulted from people deciding that it was important to them to invade the opposition territory. And as a result of that attitude, that anger, that demand to be seen to be the tough guys, and whatever you want to call them, 28 people, we're now told, are dead, and many others are injured and being taken to hospital, and presumably some of those injured are in a serious state. We've been told that the match will go on, and I really don't think UEFA had any other choice. I mean, there are people waiting in this ground, and the one thing that can take away the mind, if only briefly, from the incidents that we've seen, from the injured and the overwhelming sympathy, as I said, for those who have died. For the moment, at least, football will, we hope, become a unifying bond. And there is an enormous responsibility on the players now, if they possibly can, to put it out of their mind and to make it an attractive game and to try and show that they believe, as the majority believe, that football is one of the most beautiful and simple games and has been all around the world. And now suddenly it's been besmirched because of an attitude which a decade and more ago was totally foreign to the British character, but which now has grown until it is a cancer on society. These are still recordings of the scenes earlier, and looking down at the wall that gave way, the people who sought refuge in the only place they could go to, which in the present climate of debate at home, it should once again be said that the fact that there were fences that could be got through and people got onto the pitch, that perhaps saved even greater injury. Still the policemen on horseback are on the main running track. Let me emphasize again, this is not a continuing battle. These are pictures that we are seeing, recorded pictures of the incidents which led to the trouble and the result of that trouble. At one end of the ground, as I look now, we have mounted police. On the home straight by the stand, we have mounted police, but in riot uniform. And one has to say that the policemen at the Juventus end are conspicuous by their absence. It's a lovely, lovely still summer's evening, but one which will be remembered for all the wrong reasons and by those whose family has suffered from it. It will be an evening that will never be forgotten. There will be people here who will never go and watch a football match again, and there will be people watching these scenes who will say, I don't want to go and watch a football match. But it is not football's problem. Football is the scene which has been used because it is such a popular international game. Photographers still getting their shots. It's a sad story, Jim, but I just hope that we will have a football match here shortly, and it does seem as though, as every second goes by, the chances of that are improving.
Well, thank you, Barry. Really, we've just been talking while we've been listening to you here, and one of the things that's different in Spain and Italy and Great Britain is that there is national service in Spain and Italy. I don't know whether you would feel that that is almost a must now in this country.
There's players I play with. One of them last year had to leave the club for a bit and go and do his stint somewhere down south. I mean, I think, not that I know a great deal about national service, but I don't think it would harm the sort of people that you're seeing on the television tonight.
Terry, would you advocate that, among other things?
I have for a long time, because I think that it does give you some sort of manners and responsibility, and it does knock you into shape. In the same in our club, all our players have to do their year's service, and it's not a case of us saying what we do or what they do. It's there, and it's something that we can learn from, and because we have got the problem here. And as I said, there's one thing the Europeans have always felt about the British people, that they can behave themselves. And now it's just the opposite. You know, as I said earlier, they think the football's great, but the people, and we all get branded by this minority. And it's an organised minority as well.
As much as you see that tonight, there'll be thousands upon thousands of Italians and Liverpudlians on the other side of the ground, arms around each other, sharing their drinks, sharing their food. As Terry said, it's a minority. It's a shame you just can't pick those out.
I always felt that about the England-Scotland game, because Scots are very welcome in England. A lot of you live here, and have done. And I think there's a great affection for the Scots. And what a lovely weekend that Wembley match could be. And if they came down in peace, when they did come, I think Londoners would give them a warm welcome. And as you say, share a glass of wine or a bottle of beer or something, and make it a lovely sporting occasion. But I'm afraid we're well past that. And the sort of things that we've seen here today. It's very interesting, because it does seem in the papers that now the government and the FA seem to be falling out. So we're even having argument as to what kind of means could be made to bring it under control. What line do you take on that? It seems that the government are saying it's football's problem, you should do something about it.
I think that if it's inside the ground, it's got to be organised. I think that we're saying if it's inside the ground, it's the club's. It's its club's job to sort of protect that club and keep the walls and so forth as well as it can. But when it actually comes to the behaviour, that's got to be done to the government, in my opinion. And then if, as Graham was saying, if the police catch these people and put them into courts, then we've got to do our job by giving them as severe punishment as we can to see that it doesn't happen again. By not stopping it, we're encouraging it.
But a government's got to be single-minded about it and not just play games, has it?
Well, the government's got to actually be very single-minded and got to think about the good of the people and the name of the country, not worrying about when it's going to win votes or not. That's what we've got to be concerned about. And once we've got to say, never mind that, this is a severe problem, and let's really make it, warn them in advance, and if they do it, 10 years, whatever it is, I'm sorry, because I feel very, very strong about it, because everybody's suffering. And what's more is the people that are going to watch the games is the worst thing, because it belongs to the people of Europe. It's their favourite game. They're people that have loved from children, generations, and you do see in Barcelona the little boy and his father and his grandfather all going to the game hand in hand. 3 generations of people, 120,000 people with not a problem. And that comes from fear, because they're frightened to step out of line.
Now, if the government did accept what you're saying, let's take action and make sure that, as you say, a grandfather and a father and a son can go to a game again over here. What things would you recommend? What things have to be done by the government?
We've got to deal with the troublemakers first, because the people are not going to start, well, they've for a long time not come to football, and that is one of the main reasons why they
Proper
don't come.
punishment to start with.
Proper punishment is the number one priority.
Without a doubt. I mean, if
Cut
you
away. Let's cut that cancer away.
that out, then you're going to get families coming back to football in Italy. I don't know what the percentage of the crowds are females in this country, but you come to any game in Italy, and off the top of my head, it'd be something like 25% of the crowd would be women.
Right,
girls.
Proper punishment is one thing. National service we've talked about, and I think we'd all agree on at some stage. Now, what about when it happens abroad, as has happened here?
Well, I think it's a mistake playing it in a city like Brussels. I think if English teams are going to be involved in finals again, I think you're going to have to take them to cities where they can handle that sort of problem, i.e. Barcelona, Madrid, places in Italy as well. I mean, and these guys who are causing the trouble tonight, you don't think they would step out of line in these cities, because the policemen are just going to come along with their batons and hit them with them.
So in other words, what you're saying is, for want of a word, more brutal action by the police, if it's called for.
But you're not talking about human beings, you're talking about animals. I mean, the way they go on, they act like animals, so they should be treated like animals.
Would you go with that, Terry?
Yeah, well, I think that the time's come when it's got to be stopped. And firstly, I would put them away. I would, because I don't like. The only thing that worries me is that then people go around battering people that haven't caused the problem. Then the innocent one can be done. But when we see them on the video, we see them on the tape actually starting it. Gotcha, you're in. Bye bye. Sorry. And I tell you what, they won't do it anymore. All the time. I'm sorry to keep on about all the time that they think they're going to get away. They'll do it. I've read articles this year. Like, we get the paper a day late or whatever. And I remember seeing that the boy saying, well, I do it because I know nothing's going to happen. I know nothing's going to happen to me.
Well, bear in mind this is a government that's very strong on law and order, and it must be embarrassing to say the least that in this particular area they are failing. But I have a feeling in my own mind is that they don't realise the size of the problem to eradicate it. Would you say that?
Yes, I know. I mean, it's a great problem. I know, because I know that if they could have done something about it earlier, they would have done. But I still think there's political issues involved. Well, we've not got on top of it a lot quicker.
National service is unpopular. Doesn't win you votes, does it?
No. No, it doesn't.
The prisons are overcrowded anyway. So
and you've got to give the young lads anyway. The young lads have got to have something to be proud of. And I think that in some ways you can be proud of having a uniform, or you can doing something a bit more, because they've just got nothing to do. And then the people, the strong influences that organise these, take these stray people that have got nothing to do, and they organise them into, that is organised tonight.
Well,
because I tell you what, Liverpool, I can't remember, I don't know, Graham would know better, I can't remember that's happened with Liverpool.
Ironic. I mean,
they've been great supporters, a credit to the game for years and years. That is a surprise to me, that. And
it's rather extraordinary, you know, so quickly after the other happenings recently which have disgraced us. It's worth, I think, going back to the ground just to get an up-to-date report from Bobby Charlton and Barry Davis.
Yes, well, if I can just join in there, and I agree 100% with what Terry says. I don't think for a moment that they'll bring back national service, certainly. But I do feel that youngsters these days have to be frightened of something, they have to respect something. If you fine them, they don't seem to be able to pay the fines and they share it. If you put them in jail or a detention centre, they don't appear to be any worse off than some of them were before anyway. But I think that the only thing that you have to do is to try and actually implant in the minds before they even think about it, that it's not going to be worth doing it because the punishment is too harsh. There's lots and lots of people, myself included, think that a form of corporal punishment should come back because that is the one thing that you can't pass on to anyone else. When you see all these young lads that are just completely undisciplined, they just lose all sense of direction and discipline altogether, then it makes you think that somewhere along the line they have to be afraid of something, so that if they do it, that they're going to think twice. I do think that it's a tragedy, this, for our game, and I do think, like Terry, you know, that the government have to take the bull by the horns, and they have to make some proper legislation to make sure that the appropriate people are punished accordingly. I do think that it's gone too far now, and this probably is the end of the line as far as we are concerned. And I think we've got to be prepared for whatever punishment UEFA or FIFA decide that we deserve. And I can't say really that we deserve to be treated like that.
Just to bring you up to date with the position, the announcement that the game would take place came over the public address system, but it appears to have been an attempt to keep quiet in the stadium, which is now in a somewhat unreal calm. But there has not as yet been an official decision made by UEFA. So we still wait to know. One or two supporters at the far end, although in the stands they're very quiet. One or two supporters at the far end waving flags. The public address still appealing for calm and for patience. But we still have not heard officially from the governing body that the match will take place. Spectator prepared to take an extremely precarious position. The massed ranks of Liverpool supporters, and one remembers the piece which Bob Wilson did in Sports Night, in which Phil Neal, who had hoped to be the fourth captain to collect the European Cup here tonight, was saying that they being the team, owed everything to their supporters. And one can remember back to 1977 when the European Cup was first won, indeed the start of the domination of the event by Football League clubs, that supporters were allowed by Bob Paisley to join in the banquet afterwards. There was such a rapport between players and supporters, and nobody ever gave any thought that there would be any problems. But I think that maybe we've seen that the humour with which the Kop and Anfield was always associated has not quite been maintained in recent years. We never used to have chants there of obscene language, but we do now. And maybe one or two of that minority have been in the van of causing the problems here tonight. If you just switched on and wonder why there's no football, it is that it's been impossible for the match to take place because of problems in the crowd, which resulted in the collapse of a wall because of pressure of people. There were a number of injured, and the latest report is that 28 people have lost their lives. 30th European Cup still waits to be covered by television around the world. 80 television stations were prepared to report this match, and instead they are reporting scenes which does nothing for the feelings of mankind, if I can put it that way. Still, there are expressions on people's faces that suggest something which is impossible to define, because they still want to get out and fight in spite of all the problems. One end of the ground now has great empty spaces, just litter on the terraces. People have moved away. The police still wait on guard on horseback and with their riot shields at the ready. These are Juventus supporters we are looking at the right end of the ground, and that gives an indication of the problem, because the division there was precisely the same division which at the other end of the ground allowed supporters of Liverpool to move into an area previously occupied by supporters of Juventus. I mean, it is no barrier of any sort, and it is surprising, to say the least, that with the record of problems caused by supporters coming from the United Kingdom, if not supporters from Liverpool, whose record up to now has been pretty well exemplary, it is surprising that there were no police on hand to make sure that the difficulties which occurred were not cut off right at the outset. But here are Italian supporters armed with pieces of wood, and the gentleman on the right, if such I could call him, a stave. There is, as I said, a calm, but there is fear in that calm. Are we seeing the end of the problem? Debris all over the running track. Some just prepared to sit it out. Some with scarves around their faces as would-be bandits. Joe Fagan we saw go down the left of the main stand. I don't know whether he's gone again to appeal to supporters. But still, Jimmy, like you, we wait, and we wait with feelings of great sadness.
I expect you at home were as astonished as we are to see still aggressive actions there on the ground, even at this stage, even bearing in mind what has happened. But let's go to the newsroom, pick up the news from John Humphreys.
Well, it is still a very confused picture, and the only definite figure we have still on the number of dead is the 28 that we reported earlier from the Reuters news agency. It seems most of them died from crush injuries. They were trapped when a wall collapsed as some of the fans tried to invade the Juventus enclosure. Our reporter Wesley Kerr was within a few yards of that area, and he's just been on the telephone with this report.
The tragedy occurred about an hour before the match was due to begin, after scuffling between Juventus and Liverpool fans in the overcrowded stands. Suddenly, 6 feet in front of me, a wall collapsed. Many, many people must have died in that moment in the crush of masonry and people. But it was some time before the rescue services were called in. Astonishingly, the first people called onto the scene were riot police. At first, bodies were carried out on crowd control fences. It was 40 minutes before I saw a stretcher. I counted around 30 bodies myself. They were piled up beside the stadium.
Well, as Wesley Kerr said, the trouble started about an hour or so before the kick-off, when the Liverpool supporters, or some of them, broke out of their segregated enclosure and moved into the Juventus area and then onto the pitch. At one stage, there were thousands of them running riot on the terraces and on the field, and for a time at least the police did seem just about overwhelmed by the sheer pressure of numbers. The latest is that other news agencies and the ambulance service in Brussels have confirmed that it is at least 28 dead, and some ambulance officials say it could be as many as 50. One eyewitness, quoted by Belgian television a few minutes ago, said many of the victims were trampled underfoot. They weren't actually crushed by that wall collapsing. He said it was terrible. People were lying, dying on the stands before our eyes. At one stage, Juventus players came onto the pitch to try to calm supporters, and the Liverpool manager Joe Fagan went onto the terraces and tried to stop some of his supporters who were still fighting among themselves. We hope soon to be able to give you a telephone number to call for information on the dead and injured, and as soon as we do get that number, we'll bring it to you. But now, back to Jimmy Hill.
Well, thank you very much, John. And I suppose you wouldn't believe it, but people are ringing out for Scotland to say that we are using the word British supporters. On a night like this, I don't think anybody is scoring national points over one country or another. English, they come from Liverpool, some of them may be Scots, some of them may be Welshmen, I don't know, but I don't really think that point is significant. It just is so sad. What do you think, Terry, could be the punishment, first of all, to Liverpool as a result of those supporters, and a knock-on effect to other British...
And all credit to them. Phil Neal and his colleagues are making their own attempt to restore sanity. But still, at the right-hand end, there is a threat. The police, again, staying their ground. And no sign yet of players from Juventus. But now here they come. Still things being hurled from the terraces. hands on whatever a hand can be laid on. And although Bonini led out the Italian team to a scene which is now returning to a football match, Scirea, the official captain, is now in his place. But there are still considerable problems at the Italian end of the ground. All the officials tonight come from Switzerland, but they don't care who comes from anywhere. They're just going to cause trouble, and finally the police have decided they have to get among the crowd. Fence has been broken at that end. And the public address announcer reading through the Juventus team. Team photograph of the holders of the European Cup, Liverpool. And what a contrast it is to looking at footballers and looking at scenes of trouble on the terraces and the police. That's the Juventus lineup, showing only one change, in fact, from the team that beat Liverpool in the Super Cup, the return of Tacconi in goal. And the match at the moment is 1 hour and 25 minutes late as the coin is finally tossed between the two captains. And I would imagine the teams are going to stay as they are at the kick-in. Liverpool have had their worries about Walsh's stomach muscles, Lawrenson's right shoulder, and Ian Rush's right hand. But Joe Fagan's last choice is the team that he wanted. 3 new to European Cup finals: Feglin, Walsh and John Wall. The referee, a former professional footballer, indeed at international level, Andre Dena, also has a degree in chemistry and is the director of a concrete firm, a cement making firm. So the match will begin with fires on the terraces, with policemen in riot gear poised to stop any problem at its start. And in fact, the teams have changed ends. So Liverpool defending the goal to our right. Still the fires to put out. And can the players now produce a quality of football to at least make us, for the next hour and a half, dismiss as far as is possible from our minds the scenes which preceded this 30th final of the European Champions Cup. It's Mark Lawrenson for Liverpool and Phil Neal, the captain, who has shown himself to be a leader of men off the field as well as on. The ground is ringed by policemen, and to our right there is a rather larger group defending a hole in the terraces. The challenge by Lawrenson. And Cabrini coming up from the throw. First touch, I think, for Platini. He was well surrounded. Rush. For Walsh, still feeling the stomach muscle problem. Lawrenson. He had to hurry a bit, in fact, needed the help from Alan Hansen.